dug a bone, yo, don't give him nothing but a microphone. Don't stop, I'm not finished yet. You said I'm not the E, you wanna make it bet, remember this lounge, you in the danger zone.
Looking at it in more material terms, I would say the greatest achievements have been in the area of social benefits, in terms of improvements in health, education. But in terms of foreign policy also, there have been important gains made. In the area
Caribbean revolutionary Maurice Bishop lists the successes of his Grenada government. One of the prettiest of the Caribbean islands, Grenada's had nearly 2 years of radical socialist rule under Prime Minister Bishop.
Greetings, YouTube, and welcome to the lounge. During my 2-week break, I received a few political questions that were really good. These are the kinds of questions, by the way, that I encourage from my viewers. And I want to start off with longtime subscriber Phoenix Chastain, who made a response video to me regarding the idea of revolution. All of Phoenix's questions were real and they were rooted in honesty. So, revolution. What happens to people during it? What happens to people after it? How would you get people to get on board with it? Phoenix also poses more questions. What is the specific system that I want to present as an alternative if I want to bring down capitalism in the state? What would be the specific plan to implement such an alternative system? How could you sell any kind of alternative system to billions of people who depend on said system? Is the end goal to just dismantle? People might hate the system that is racist or sexist or keeps them poor. If there is no real plan, people will see the proposed revolution with great suspicion. Is this really just about turning people into malcontents who are happy with only fighting cops? What is the vision and what will this look like? And lastly, and this is my own question that I would ask myself, why should anyone risk their lives in a shooting war with cops and military, or rather those who will most likely defend the said system? Are you fucking nuts? Now I'm going to go ahead and answer my question first. I do not relish the idea of people getting into a shooting war, and of course, when you're talking about armed struggle, that is not revolution in and of itself. When people wind up arming themselves against cops and military, it only comes down to that point because the state are the ones who are violent from the beginning. That's what they do. You've seen people win elections peacefully. Some countries of South America, and those who win, say, presidential offices, wind up getting assassinated. You've seen violent coups happen to reverse actual revolutions led by people, such as Burkina Faso, such as in countries like Burkina Faso or Grenada back in the early 80s. And the ruling class there will collude with the United States, with the CIA rather, and will overthrow them. And of course, all of these reversals of revolutions have been indeed violent. In other words, it's the ruling class who are the ones who get violent, not the people. And sometimes when you decide to make a stand that you're not going to put up with it, then you defend yourself. So armed struggle is nothing more than a response to the state. It is about defending yourself. Now on to Phoenix's questions. Now I've paraphrased Phoenix's questions overall, and the link to Phoenix's video is in low bar. I guess the thing to start with is changing people's minds, and that could only happen with political education simultaneously as we organize a resistance. We want to raise consciousness to understand why we've been placed on the food chain the way that we have, and why the class system is not designed for everyone to succeed. We have to get people to see this. And what we want to do is to force the question as to why we've been socialized to see our only motivation to make our lives better is through money. Money, by the way, that we never seem to be able to make enough of. And with what little money we do make is only enough for us to barely make it. Also, we want to force the question as to why do we devalue human life and each other? I know that we have to counter people's perception of our current way of life. And our current way of life is that it was handed down to us on high, and that life is shitty. But that shitty life is manageable. And people would most likely prefer this manageable shitty life rather than have to embrace some great dark unknown where the rulers are no longer in power. But see, that illusion of what is manageable is based on our familiarity. So despite those concerns, we fear leaving that familiarity. Revolutionaries do need to understand people's dependency on the current system, and we need to start talking, teaching, exchanging ideas, fielding what those fears are, and trying our best to pull them to our way of seeing things. What will make these discussions easier is when we approach people when a crisis is actually happening. But to do that, you have to talk to quote unquote ordinary people. So it's about talking and to get them to see beyond the lies of the so-called social contract that our current leaders are supposed to be here for. Hopefully, that will get people on board for a so-called revolution. Fighting the dependency on an oppressive society is the bigger fight, probably more than fighting cops and soldiers. I mean, even the advanced radical becoming a revolutionary, say someone like Joseph Stalin, for instance, was still dependent on, or rather influenced by the ways of the old society that he was raised under. He didn't see workers as important. Therefore, he betrayed the revolution by never furthering working people's political education so that they can advance to become the true builders of a socialist society and putting them in power. Instead, he wanted a state that could empower him and his ruling political party of cronies. So it's very powerful, this dependency on the current system. Phoenix, you are correct in pointing that out. When Harriet Tubman was conducting the escapes of slaves, there was always one or two who would change their minds at the very last second, because having to take that leap of faith into what would be unknown, in other words, freedom from slavery, was scary for them. At least with Massa, he had hot meals, a schedule, and shelter in his slave quarters. I don't mean to use the slave metaphor in any way as a condescension. I just want to make a point about that fear, that even someone who was under a cruel system of slavery, when faced with embracing freedom, it was a very scary thing. But understand, those slaves were still a minority compared to everyone else who wanted freedom. So I think it's a very natural thing for us to finally come to a point of understanding that it's preferable for us to get away from a system that is killing us. Class exploitation, racism, and sexism, and everything else that seeks to kill the human spirit is dependent on two things as I see it. More powerful than actually being able to use an outright police state. It is dependent on people not having faith in other people and themselves, and it is dependent on people not thinking that they are oppressed. That sure, things aren't perfect, but we can live with those imperfections, and living with those imperfections from a rotten system is better than living without the system itself. And that despite the pain it gives us, it at least works, as opposed to something that one can only draw on paper as a pretty picture. But human societies in our earlier histories have lived without authoritarianism and chasing the carrot on a stick with guns to our heads. We did have societies across the globe at different points of history that ran on what we call mutual aid. And what I believe that could replace what we have now is a socialism that is run on consensus, voluntary collectivism, and workers' control of production and mutual aid. How will we get to that is going to take a lot of hard work, and to keep it going means not cutting corners by using authoritarian ways or trying to copy the system as it was before, but just trying to make it less mean. And we need to have the desire that we want something better. Now, details, Phoenix, might look like things such as forming assemblies. Assemblies are community groupings based on volunteer, mutual aid, organizing, so on and so forth. Then there would be the forming of workers' councils. These would be the workplace organizational bodies either carrying on with the takeover and possessing and directing production for the rest of us. Both community assemblies and workers' councils would seek at the same time to make these spaces autonomous from authorities and owners. I have to stop here and say again that what you're asking is for revolutionaries to be real about these ideas and not going into flowery visions of utopia, but instead laying out an overview of what is needed to replace what we are living under. Some of these things are going to have to be done through trial and error as well. There is no manual. So there is no magic bullet or magic spell to put on people. There is only the vision that we offer in hopes that people will be clear that what we are living under now is not benefiting us at all. It is an illusion. I don't expect my answers in this episode to not have follow-up questions or to set off debates. That's fine. But these are the best answers I can give for now. I will get to the other viewers' questions in part 2 of Answering Questions, Questions Answered. Drive home safely from the lounge.